Hi, I'm Ven. Welcome to my book corner. Today I want to talk a little bit about three novellas that I've read this month and just give my thoughts on them. So the first one is Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. This is an audiobook that I listened to. The second one is another sci-fi novella, The Gift of Alias by Michael Colon. And finally, we have Premi Mohamed's The Rider, the Ride, and the Witch Man's Wife. So, without further ado, let's start off with Artificial Condition. With Murderbot finally hitting the screen for the TV adaptation, which I believe has been very, very well received, I thought it was about time I continued with my Murderbot journey. So I listened to Artificial Condition. This is our book 2 in the series by Martha Wells. This is narrated by Kevin R. Free. The book actually comes in at 158 pages. The audio is 3 hours and 21 minutes for the unabridged version. And this continues shortly after the events of Book 1, with Murderbot making their way across known space to give himself some distance from his previous crew. And during this journey, Murderbot decides to look into the events of their own past, specifically when they were a bot on a mining colony where some form of disaster happened, as they have no knowledge or memory of this, and it's quite hard to find stuff through the media feeds. To do this, as Murderbot did previously, he contacts various different AIs on transports that are unmanned and ends up meeting with a research transport called Artie. Now, Artie is phenomenal. Absolutely love this character. I really hope we get to see more of them in the future. And you end up with this unlikely alliance with Artie helping Murderbot in terms of recognizing some of their own challenges and flaws, with fitting in with people, which realistically Murderbot is going to have to continue their investigation, and to help find cover to get to the mining colony without flagging any security sort of trips, to discover what really happened, as Murderbot believes that they are responsible for all the deaths, and Artie immediately challenges this. I really like the way that this plays out. I like the almost petulant nature of Murderbot in this, as it kind of explains him that he's making the wrong assumption straight off the bat in terms of what actually happened, which Artie continually sort of presses. I like the fact that Artie is obviously the smartest person in the room and knows it, and very skillfully manages to manipulate Murderbot into certain situations. But on top of that, it's completely on Murderbot's side. And I love the kind of banter and the sharing that goes on of media and how they approach different things and their different perspectives. And when we actually get to the mining colony, we have more examples of how Murderbot struggles to fit in with people, in terms of things like eye contact or just looking natural, and struggles between their own historical programming and their own moral compass now, and how there's actually a lot of similarity there in terms of actual aims, but how Murderbot struggles with the freedom of choice. This is a lot of fun to listen to. I do highly recommend this to anyone who did enjoy Book 1 or has enjoyed the series, but also for sci-fi fans in general. While this is quite hard sci-fi in many respects, because of the human, inverted commas, element that Murderbot brings, this makes this a really, really easy read due to the fact of how character-centric it is. It's just the setting is very high-tech. Again, it is very, very, very well narrated as well, with Kevin doing an amazing job of catching the different cadence between the various different AIs and characters as well. And there's some laugh out loud moments in here, even though this is actually quite a dark story, there is a good sprinkling of humour in here, which helps lift the mood, which I really, really enjoyed. I give this one 4.25 stars. I think if you're after something that's got a good degree of humour in a sci-fi setting that's very character-centric, I think you'll absolutely adore this one. Up next, we have The Gift of Alias by Michael Colon. This came out in October of 2024 and comes in at 125 pages long. And this is another AI-focused story, this time around the character of A191. Now, A191 is a codex. In this world, a codex is the name for anything containing AI in a robotic form. And specifically, these ones were designed to mimic humans. However, something has occurred in the past, and all of the codex live behind the walls of a city called Paradise that is run from a massive AI mainframe to keep them all safe, or so it appears. And a normal day is going to work, doing your duty, going home, and hitting the key points of what society would expect to keep it whirring like a machine. And this is a really interesting story. It's quite a dry read, and it has some very, very strong religious undertones to it, as A191 is slightly different to the rest, beginning to get these visions, has a photograph of some humans on them, and doesn't know why, and begins to experience what they believe is a glitch. And when they get this checked out, there's something slightly different about them. Now, within this world as well, if you deviate from your programming, then you are potentially banished or taken offline as well, which is worth mentioning here. And it's a very difficult time for the City of Paradise, as a revolution is beginning to gather speed, with various codexes going rogue and forming a revolution. Now, this revolution is crushed in relatively short order, but A191 is seen as the key to change. A couple of reviews I've seen of this mention how this pulls a lot of inspiration from films like The Matrix, as well as from Christianity more specifically. And I can definitely see those undertones here. This does feel quite Christian heavy in its messaging, especially looking at stories like The Crossing of the Red Sea. And also you have sort of this displaced consciousness idea going on with A191 as well, which is not too dissimilar from Neo from The Matrix. And in fact, A191 does actually start to exhibit certain abilities and behaviour which are clearly atypical, showing them to be something slightly different to the rest. Things take more of a turn as we get further into the story, when we discover that life in paradise is not all it appears to be, and maybe, just maybe, the humans weren't the enemy all along. I did really, really enjoy this. It is quite a dry read, and it's not going to be for everyone, but as a thought experiment, I do really enjoy books like this. And whilst it does pull quite strongly from The Matrix and directly from Christian sort of values and scripture, and repurposes that, it does work really well with this idea of this godlike AI overseeing everything within this land, but also the sort of journey of discovery and leading the oppressed people, or the oppressed codexes, I should say, to freedom, has some clear mirroring. But I did enjoy this quite a bit. Not going to be for everyone. If you're a fan of hard sci-fi though, and you like stories about where AI could go, there's definitely a story here for you. I give this one a 3.75 stars out of 5. Finally, we have The Rider, The Ride, The Rich Man's Wife by Premi Mohammed. I really do enjoy Premi's novellas. Really, really do. Butcher in the Forest was amazing. This is really good as well. This is a dystopian fantasy horror. And basically, something has occurred that has caused the world to fall. And now communities live outside of the old ancient cities, which are still surprisingly in reasonably good condition. Well, they live in these small, ramshackle communities where they've built stuff out of whatever they can find. But there is, at least in this part of the world, a massive drought. And rain only comes every few years, just before the arrival of the rider and the wife. And basically, they fetch with them the rain. However, in return for this, they mark somebody to be hunted. The rules are set by the rider and the wife, and there's lots of lore and history and rumour about what they are. And when Kit is chosen to be the hunted, his twin brother Lucas chooses to break the rules and help him. And the idea of this is that they have to survive from the time when the horn is sounded at a certain time of day until I think it's when the sun sets. But the rider and the wife have control over certain things. And it took me far longer to realise that this is a take on one of the better known European myths, the Wild Hunt. And I love the Wild Hunt, and the fact it took me so long to recognise this really, really bugged me. You have extra planar travel, you have supernatural events going on, you have the bending of the rules, and you do have some actual horror moments here because you don't know what these creatures are. They look more or less human-ish, but they are surrounded by their hounds who are almost like a liquid smoke dog thing. Best way to describe it. And most people do not survive the hunt. And you end up going into what basically feels a little bit like the Fey realm at one point as they go through a portal and end up discovering that these aren't the only hunters. Other places have their own bespoke hunters as they find some of the hunted. And they finally begin to realise how stacked the deck is against them. This is the most dense of the 3 books, and I absolutely love this. I really enjoy the take of taking such a well-known sort of historical folklore fantasy idea as the Wild Hunt and moving it into a very different setting, as in a post-dystopian Earth, so to speak. I really like how our 2 main characters of Lucas and Kit, despite being twins, are very, very different in the way that they approach things. Very much a yin and yang thing going on there in terms of how they approach problems. One being all action, no thought, whereas the other one is far more thoughtful in their actions. And it's interesting when you then go to the realm where the Wild Hunt come from and seeing how that operates is really fascinating to see. I read this in a day. This was an amazing read. If you like the idea of taking an old folk tale and twisting it into a very different setting, and you like a really dense and literary take on something like this, I think you will really enjoy this one. Well, there we go. That's the 3 novellas I wanted to talk about today. I had an absolute blast with all 3 of these. Very different tonally between the 3. Obviously, out of the 3 as well, The Rider is my favourite, but I'm a fantasy reader ahead of being sci-fi, so that probably makes sense. But all well worth checking out if you're after a pretty quick read. But what I would like to know from you amazing people is what novellas have you read recently that you would recommend for me to check out? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all very soon.